How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another amazing edition to the Building Out Loud podcast. It is I, your host, MacTheVC, aka Matt Conwell. I am here with my co-host, Liam Gill. How you doing, Liam?
Doing good. A couple of rough starts to this, but we'll get going now.
Yeah, we're usually one take, but today didn't work out that way. It happens, folks. It happens.
We're surprisingly good with single takes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. People don't understand this podcasting thing. It ain't that easy. It's a lot of hard work. Actually, y'all probably do understand because everybody has a podcast at this point. Like literally everybody. And we're just happy to be another one of them. Anyway, how's it going? Today we have a really fun topic. Thanks to all the responses we got on Twitter. One of them that popped up was how to deal with VCs who give predatory terms or just don't hold up their end of the bargain. You know, it's what the kids like to call ghosting. What do you do? And so I think me and Liam are going to have a fun conversation on this. But Liam, let me ask you a question. Have you ever had a VC give you a term sheet that had terms that you were just like, yeah, I can't do this?
Yeah. Before we jump in, for anyone watching this on video, I've got two cameras going, so I'm only looking at one at a time. So don't judge if I'm looking in weird directions. Trying something new for the TikTok clips here.
What is TikTok? All you young people with all your face looks and Twitter spaces and everything.
Man, like mind
blowing.
Why
are we doing TikTok?
Mind blowing stat that like my former CMO told me a couple weeks ago. 40% of people under 25 use TikTok over Google as their primary search engine.
Okay, TikTok. I need to be on TikTok.
That's insane, though. Like, imagine that. Like, we Google stuff to get like a website and read the information, and they just search on TikTok to watch like a 15-second video giving them the answer.
Wow, I need to try that next time. I'm trying to remember like how's the easiest way to crack some eggs. I'm gonna go on TikTok. There you go.
But yeah, I should probably loop back to that question. So I personally haven't been in that situation where I've had like an investor back out of anything. I've been like very lucky to have actually good relationships with most of my investors and to have known them for a while before I even took money or started with them. So no, I can't personally relate to that.
Well, I can. And it wasn't even an investor. It was an accelerator. So story time, folks. When I was an entrepreneur back in the days of like the wilderness and, when we had to walk 5 miles in the snow barefoot to get to school, I got a term sheet from an accelerator where most accelerators today terms are fairly standard. They look similar to each other. YC set a standard, maybe not a dollar amount, but in like the way terms are set. Anyway, this is back in 2012, and a local accelerator here gave us had a term sheet for anybody who would come to the accelerator in the form of a convertible note. And in that convertible note had all these extra provisions. And now, I'm a first-time entrepreneur. I don't understand half of this stuff. I'm just like, hey, they giving me money. Where do I sign? Awesome. I had a local angel investor pull me aside and was like, hey, I know you got into this program, but you might want to rethink it. There's some weird terms in here. And then he started breaking them down to me and what they meant. So I'm like, man, this doesn't sound cool, but like, what should it say? He's like, well, here are the ones that aren't standard. And one of the biggest ones that stood out was this anti-dilution clause. For those who don't know, dilution, really interesting thing in the investment world. When somebody invests in your company, they take ownership in a portion of it. Awesome. Well, dilution means as you gain more investors over time, you're not the only one who loses equity in your business. So does everybody else who has ownership. So if VC comes in and buy and invest in your company and you give them 20%, you now own 80%, they own 20%. Well, if another VC comes around later and wants to give you more money for 20%, you lose 20% of your 80, and your earlier VCs lose 20% of their 20. So it all starts off as a new whole 100% every time. And so that's how dilution works. It's not like you give them 20% and then you give them another 20%, you're left with 60. No, it happens slower than that. and everybody who has ownership gets affected. That's dilution. What anti-dilution clauses do means, hey, when we raise more money and we gotta give equity, I don't have to give up anything. And that means everybody else has to give up more to make up for that investor who has the anti-dilution clause. It's a pretty terrible clause, especially for an accelerator that's going to be one of the first investors you get. It's like almost having like a co-founder, early co-founder in your company that disappeared and only did work after 3 months and still owns like, 6% of your company no matter what, or more. And so after he told us that, we got all upset. We got together with other entrepreneurs. We made a whole to-do about it, talked about it on Facebook. That used to be the way we complained about businesses. Before Twitter, we went to Facebook to say what was terrible and get the community riled up. And they ended up having to change their terms and make them a lot more standard and founder-friendly. And so it happens. That was an accelerator. Working with VCs or investors can be a lot tougher. So Liam, I know you've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs. Have you ever worked anybody through that? Or if not, what would you do if you found yourself in that situation?
Yeah, so there's a few different situations that I've seen. So the first would be people who don't understand how safes work. So a lot of them don't understand that they have the exact same dilutive method or organisms as what you described, which is that the safes don't dilute until the equity actually gets transferred. So if you have like a shit ton of safes, if you've raised 6 or 7 safes, those safes don't dilute each other. So in the first safe, that investor's going to get 20%, and the second safe, the investor's going to get another 10%. Like that 10% doesn't come out of the first investor's 20. So effectively, that investor doesn't need to bear the same burden as you do for future rounds up until their equity actually converts. So that's like one thing I've seen that's very, very common is founders who don't understand how safes work, who end up stacking safes. And we've talked about this before, how you can end up stacking safes, who do that and who end up in like a very, very bad position. Obviously, that's not like a investor acting nefariously or an investor, putting in bad terms or defrauding you or whatnot. But it is something that comes up quite often. So that's one thing I would point out just while we're on the topic of conversion and how, actually dilution works and how the whole process of, VC to some extent works. So that's one I want to mention off the top. I know that there is a lot of companies I've seen that have rights to invest in future rounds in their agreements. And this is like still very common in the Valley. And you would be shocked. Genuinely, I went through this exercise a few years ago, I think a year and a half ago, with a Silicon Valley VC. And I won't name any of the companies involved or anything because I have relationships with some of them. And, it's a big, big issue. And I know that, one mention on this podcast is going to change it. But a lot of the biggest name accelerators in the Valley still have provisions which allow them to buy up 40 or 50% of your future rounds. So that means like if you get investment, let's say you give up 10% of your company for 100K at like $1 million valuation, something like that. You then go and raise 4 or 5 future rounds. In those 4 or 5 future rounds, you're probably going to give up 60, 70% of the company. And that initial investor could buy up half of all of that. So that initial investor could end up with like 45, 50% of your company by the end of the day. And you actually end up being the minority shareholder to that majority shareholder. So it's a very, very precarious position to be in. I think generally one thing to keep in mind is that founders who actually go to IPO on average own 16% of their companies, assuming there's a sole founder. So you're not going to have a lot of your company by the time it gets to the later stages. So you need to make sure that out of the other 84%, that it's not all going to one person or one group of people, that it's going to like a diverse group of investors that you can work with and that you can, that aren't all on the same page and, aren't having their vision put forward above yours, where you actually have a chance to work with them and actually get a majority consensus to like run the company. So that would be another clause that I see very, very often would be right to purchase in future rounds. And a lot of founders actually never think twice about it because they're like, this is great. This is incredible. Like this guy wants to buy a lot of my future rounds. Like he must really love me. And he must like really, really want to do this. But what they don't realize is it's not an obligation. So they don't have to do it. It's a right. And they're only going to exercise it if it's to your detriment. Like they're only going to exercise it if it means that they're going to get control of the company. Otherwise, a lot of them already naturally have pro rata rights or will ask just for pro rata rights, which is if they own 10%, they're allowed to keep their 10%. So they can buy up as much equity as they need to continue keeping 10%. That's a standard clause, but allowing them to buy 50% plus future rounds is not standard. And that's something a lot of founders either overlook, think is good, or like down the line end up being like completely screwed by because they had a complete like misunderstanding of at the early stage.
That's so real. Gotta understand the terms and make sure that two things. One, when you go out there to get legal help, make sure you get yourself a good lawyer. And not just a good lawyer, but a good startup lawyer. Somebody who does this day in and day out, and this is all they do. And that's the kind of person you need help. Like my man, Lawyer Liam over here. Startup lawyer. Somebody specializes in this type of work. Really important. Secondly, so we've been talking about like nasty terms that we've seen and like the way it can affect your company. And a lot of it's around like dilution and ownership. So what do you do to combat that? You got one really strong tool to support you to change these kinds of things. It's called negotiations. All these things that you have in these term sheets and these contracts and these safe notes and convertible notes, all this stuff, it's all negotiable, right? It's all just language that you can put in or take out. And so the first thing you need to do is make sure you understand what you're reviewing. Make sure you got a good lawyer to review it and to go over terms and who you trust to give you to let you know which terms are standard and non-standard, and who's even going to break down some of the standard ones to you. And then it's up to you to decide, okay, which of these things can I not live with and take back to the investor like, hey, I'm down for this, but I'm not signing these things. Like, I'm signing, but you have to take these things out. That's really your strongest course of action. What do you say to that, Liam?
I'll say two things. So number one, on the lawyer front, a lot of people advertise themselves as startup lawyers, but are actually VC lawyers and actually are transaction lawyers who work on like the purchase and sale of companies and work on venture capital transactions. So be a bit careful with those people, because one of the things that's kind of sucks, but like being a lawyer is a business, and most lawyers, for better or for worse, are kind of like scummy people who want to make as much money as possible. And they're going to make a shit ton more money by having the venture capitalist as their client than they will by having you. So a lot of times I've seen lawyers take deals with founders as a way of introducing themselves to VCs. And likewise, you'll have like a lot of lawyers who work with one VC who might represent founders when they work with other VCs. But still, there's like a lot of conflict of interest in there. There's a lot of them who are always trying to like get the bigger fish. Like I know it's like a played out joke on like TV shows, but like a lot of lawyers are like going with small companies and trying to work their way up to larger clients. And it makes sense when you can have like a single VC as your client and bring in millions a year versus having to get, 100, like 1,000 startups just to get like, half of that brought in revenue. So like, that's one thing to keep in mind is like when you find a startup lawyer, find one that works with startups. Don't find one that works with VCs, or don't find one whose goal it is to work with VCs. Like make sure you're finding someone who actually is like a former founder, someone who has dedicated their practice to founder issues. So there's a few law firms that will do like a mixture of startup law. So they'll do like privacy policies, they'll do like incorporations, they'll do venture capital raises, they'll do like family and friend rounds. They'll do like essentially a package catered to startups. So that would be my number one thing, is just look for those type of lawyers and not necessarily one that market themselves as like a lawyer who could represent you in a transaction or a raise, because a lot of them are more focused on the VC side. And even if they do take you, there's a good chance that they're taking it as a way of introducing themselves to the VC. I'm not saying they're not going to act in your interest, but they're definitely, in the back of their mind know that if they impress this VC or if they do well in this, that, that VC could potentially hire them and give them a hell of a lot more money than you could ever dream of at that stage. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Moving on from that, in terms of what was your specific question? I completely skipped my mind. That's good. I was hoping it would come back.
I was asking, how did you feel about the idea that the most powerful tool you have at your disposal is negotiations? When it comes to like harsh terms.
Yeah, I completely agree. Negotiation is like the best thing, and a lot of founders don't think they can do it because, like, it's really weird. Having been on both sides now, I think is very, very weird, and most people will not agree with this. But founders view like VC as like this end goal, and you're fighting for venture capital dollars, and they're not there. No one wants to give them to you, and yes, you finally get the one term sheet, and you gotta sign it, and like this is your reward. But like I've seen VCs and they're the opposite. They're all fighting to try to find good companies. They're all trying to fight to invest in those good companies. Like there's not as much competition per se as there is on the founder side, but it is definitely a competitive industry. And being in the middle now as a lawyer, you see like both sides of that. And if you're going to get an offer from one VC or one angel, you're probably going to get some from others. It's a matter of numbers. If you reached out to 3 and you've got one offer, try reaching out to 300 and you'll probably get at least 5 offers. That's just like, it's a numbers game. And most founders don't think of it that way. They think of it as, these are the guys most likely to invest in us. We're going to reach out to these 30. And if they get one offer, they feel that they need to take it. And that's not necessarily the case. You can reach out to a large number of people. You'll get different types of offers and you can negotiate from there. I think another thing to think about, which a lot of founders don't, is that VC deals are holistic. So I see a lot of founders who will go through a term sheet and be like, I like this term, I don't like this term, I like this term, I don't like this term. And they'll go and negotiate all the terms they don't like. What they don't do is take a look at the deal as a whole. Maybe the VC is giving you a higher valuation than they're comfortable with because they've got a higher liquidation preference. So they've protected their downside if you go bankrupt. Like maybe that's the way they've structured it. Maybe that's
what's the liquidation preference?
I think we got over a couple episodes ago, but very quickly, it's just the amount of money that gets paid out and who gets paid out first if the company goes bankrupt or gets sold. So if an investor gives you $1 million, they might have a 2x liquidation preference, which means that they just get the first $2 million that the company gets if they go into liquidation or if they get sold. So it's a way for investors to balance their risk. Let's say that they think there's a very small chance your company works. They don't think it's going to be a 10x. They might put in a liquidation preference so they know even if you grow at a steady rate and you 3x your business, they're going to 2x their money. And to you, that might be a deal you want to take or you don't want to take. But you could negotiate down the valuation and negotiate down the liquidation preference, or you could, change the amount of money that you're allowed to spend without VC approval or without board approval. And in exchange for that, they might lower their liquidation preference. Like if you take the contract and the term sheet holistically, and you try to figure out what the VC is doing, like where they're trying to cover their risk, where they're willing to take risk, you might be able to balance things off and make things work. There's also a lot of VCs that will give you very founder-friendly for terms in some areas where they're not particularly concerned. And you might be willing to sacrifice those founder-friendly terms in exchange for better terms in other areas. So that would be my one biggest piece of advice when it comes to negotiation is make sure you consider the term sheet and the eventual agreement holistically. Because a lot of founders forget to do that. They go term by term, and you're never going to win with an investor only negotiating the terms that you want to see changed. You need to also compromise and see which terms you're willing to move on and to sort of see it from their business perspective. Like they're investors, they want to make money. So you need to be able to holistically see what the deal means to them, where their risks are, and try to rebalance those in another way. And you probably have a lot more success negotiating that way.
Okay, I got to jump in here because Liam just hit on something really, really important. He said, some of the terms in there, a little bit of give and take. The VC might be trying to give you a little something, even though they're taking something. Now, here's the thing. Once you take money from a VC, you're entering into a partnership. Understand that. It's a partnership. And nobody likes to enter a partnership unhappy or feeling like they got railroaded. Now, if you listen to some founders out there, they'll tell you that the most important thing in the world is get the best terms you can for you. Raise as much money as you need to, get the best terms. That's the only thing that matters. Okay, fair. But if you do that and the VC concedes, they're probably going to concede and not be too happy about it. You'd be like, oh, who cares? These VCs are sharks. They just try to get as much ownership in my business anyway. I'm going to get them for all I can. Okay, here's the problem with that. And here, it's important to want to have it be a partnership. Liam, did I freeze for you just now? And I can't even hear you.
You're all good now. You froze for like half a second.
Oh, God. Okay. So here's the thing. This is why it's so important to like think of it as a partnership and not just one person trying to get the other. Is because when you raise capital from your current investors, whenever you need more money, the people you talk to first are your current investors. Well, in the world like today, here we are sitting in September of 2022 with this economic downturn that's come around. A lot of companies are hard on money, and a lot of companies out there need help. And when you need help, you know who you go to first? Your current investors. And you know what's going to happen if you railroaded your current investors when they first invested in you, when you took them for the highest valuation, got all the terms you wanted, everything you needed. Well, if you ever need help and you need to go back to them, if they think you're a good entrepreneur, it's a good business, they may help. But I promise you, their help's going to come with much harsher terms than they had originally. And it's kind of all nothing you can really do about it. But if it was a partnership and it worked out well, and y'all have had some give and take, and y'all been able to work together, and you need some help, well, yeah, that VC might want to help. And yeah, they'll make everything reasonable. That's why you never want to go into these things trying to get everything you can as an all or nothing sum game. It's a partnership. Goes both ways.
I think another thing to consider when you're talking about VCs and negotiating as hard as you can is that every round sets the precedence for the next round. So if you anticipate that you're going to raise another round, it's not only that you're going to go to those same investors in the way Mac said, but the terms you raise in your Series A, for example, or your seed round are likely to be the baseline terms for your Series B, not only for your current investors, but for every new investor that comes in. Because if suddenly you're offering more favorable terms later down the line, your earlier investors will be worried. And when you go to raise your Series C in another 18 months from now, future investors are going to be worried that, this is what's going to happen to them. So you're going to struggle to get new investors on because every set of investors that comes is worried that the next guy is going to get a better deal, which isn't a position you want to be in. You're also like actively screwing over your current investors. So for the most part, what you're going to end up with is setting a precedence early on and like Series A, like this is what we're going to give investors. This is what we're not going to give investors. And you're only going to change that when there's a massive change in sort of economic circumstances like there is today, or the state of the business, the marketability of the business. Like if there's a massive change, then you might change those terms. And if you do, there's a good chance that there's going to be some sort of clause in past agreements that will allow those previous investors to upgrade their shares to whatever the current class is. I know a lot of VCs will use something like a most favored nation clause, or they'll use some sort of best preference shares clause. So they'll get whatever type of class they want. So either they can choose which preferred shares they want, or best favored nation is just objectively if one class is better than the others, they get that class automatically. So that's really one thing to consider is you don't want to, and I know this is kind of like a joked out thing in Silicon Valley at this point, which is like you don't want to raise a too high valuation because it'll screw you in future, but it is true. And then the same comes with terms. Even if your valuation is fair, if your terms are completely out of whack with what is in the market at the moment, you're going to have a hard time raising because you're going to have to either get current investors to back down or back off. You're going to need to actively screw over like your current investors, which will make it harder to raise in future. Like it's just not a great position to be in. And I've been in that position before where we raised at the highest valuation possible instead of taking what was probably the best deal on the table. And we turned down money to get a higher valuation, and it lowered our runway. It put us in a very bad position. It made it so hard to negotiate future rounds because we had to have a down round because we had just raised way too high. Like we raised on hype, and once we launched, it just wasn't there anymore. So it is a horrible position to be in, and I can say that from personal experience. And you really want to try to avoid that if you can. So as Max said, it might not seem this way all the time. It might not seem like founders and investors are trying to get the fairest deal. It might often seem like they're trying to do what's best for them. but you really do need to try to get what's fair for everyone, because what's fair for you and your investor today is probably also what's going to be best for both of you guys in 18 months from now when you're raising your next round, 36 months, down the line, every time you're raising rounds. Like, that's probably the starting point you want moving forward as well.
That's right. And one last point I want to make. Yes, your lawyer is there to support you and help you and tell you what's going on. Your lawyer is there to help you negotiate. Do not leave it all up to your lawyer. If there are certain things that you want done and your lawyer is giving you advice that you do not agree with, you do not have to follow that advice. If you want to negotiate something that your lawyer is vehemently against, you can still do that. They work for you. Always remember, your lawyer works for you. They can give you advice. They can tell you what you should do or what they think you should do. But at the end of the day, you still get to make the decision. And if they're not doing what you ask, you can cut them out of the transaction and do the negotiations yourself. You, as the entrepreneur, hold the power. Still your business. Screw the lawyers, screw the VCs, screw everybody else. At the end of the day, this is your business. You get to make the decisions.
Yeah, I think that's like a
really Liam.
No. That's really, really good point. I think this is especially important for founders from the US, because this is a very, very American thing, which is that US TV shows like, I don't know, Suits or Boston Legals, or I don't know what else. There's Good Wife, whatever. There's a lot of legal dramas in the US, and they all paint this idea that like the role of the client is to like shut up and let the lawyer do the lawyer things. And that is a very, very, very American approach to law. In Canada, for example, like we are taught from the start that our job is to advise specifically on what our clients want advice on. So if you came to me and you were like, here's a term sheet, like negotiate this, I would like legally not be allowed to do that. That's against the law for a lawyer to do that. What I would have to do is come back to you and say, what are your goals? What are you willing to sacrifice? Do you understand the terms? What do you need an explanation on? Like, our role is for you to come to us as the business owner and say, I'm having this interaction with the legal system. This is the part of it I don't understand, and this is the advice I need to understand it. And we help you understand it. We will advise you. We'll say, if I was in your position, this might be, from a legal perspective, the course of action I take. But we will all qualify that advice by saying it's not business advice. It's not, advice from a strategic standpoint. It's simply a legal perspective, and that you should take this and combine it with your business acumen and whatever's got you to this point so far and make the decision yourself. And it's a very, very weird thing when I negotiate deals with US lawyers, because there's times when like our clients are talking to each other and have agreed to something, and the US lawyer steps in and is like, this is not what we want. And I'm like, well, your client explicitly said he wants this. And it's a very American thing that like you guys allow lawyers to make decisions for you and to like run your businesses, and to like really, really defer entire areas that are very important, like entire mergers and acquisitions, entire venture capital deals are all like pushed off to lawyers. And at the end of the day, the lawyer's job is to bill you out as high as possible and to try to get you as like a return client. It's not to ensure the long-term success of your business or your relationship with that VC. Like, everything that is in your best interest isn't always in that lawyer's best interest. So you really, really, really should treat it the way that like Europeans and Canadians treat the legal system, which is lawyers are there for advice. You should use them to understand your situation. You should use them to give you a legal opinion on your situation, but you should never, ever allow them to replace your job and to actually take over a transaction and to run the transaction and to negotiate the deals. It's a very, very weird situation. And I've been in it in Canada a lot, because obviously cultural sort of hangover from the US, where clients come to us and they're like, can you please negotiate this deal for us? And we're legally not allowed to do that. We have to say, no, we're not allowed to do that. We can give you legal advice on what you may or may not want in it, but like, it's up to you to actually determine what is best for your business. And I think that's really something a lot of Americans and people who grew up like with that culture don't understand, is lawyers are generally, and I don't want to say this too broadly, but they are pretty incompetent at everything other than law. If you consider the path that it takes to become a lawyer, it's like 4 years, normally like a criminology or some other like bullshit undergrad degree, and then 3 years of law school. And law school isn't what you expect it is. Like, I didn't go to law school and study just business law. Like, I knew from the day I went to law school that if I was to practice, I was going to practice corporate. But I still had to take, trust and equity, property, privacy. I had to take criminal. You have to take every type of law, because when you pass the bar, you're a lawyer that is allowed to practice every type of law. So they're very, very much generalist. Law school is very generalist, and the bar exams are very generalist. So your lawyer is definitely not going to have the information that you have in terms of understanding your company, especially if it's a tech company. Like I've seen, we have when I was at my firm, we had to write agreements for like APIs and for SDKs and for tech investments, and the lawyers would literally be googling like what the tech term means while writing an agreement, which is only about like it's developer to developer agreement about how to use an API, and the lawyer doesn't even know what an API is, but is writing the entire agreement, and it makes no sense. And that's a whole different conversation I'm probably going into at this point, but it just be aware of that as the person who is ultimately going to have to live with the decisions of what's written on that piece of paper, that you need to understand it, and the lawyer's there to help you understand that piece of paper, not to determine what's actually on it.
Well, there it goes. So let's recap. What happens when you see harsh terms or terms you don't agree with? Get legal advice and help. Negotiate and fight as hard as you can. But also at the end of the day, it's a little bit of give and take, right? Hopefully that was helpful for y'all. And I hope y'all enjoyed this edition of Building Out Loud podcast. It looks like Liam got one last thing to say. Liam, you got anything left for the folks?
No, I think we've covered it all. I think it's just very important that you don't leave this up to lawyers, that you're confident in your ability to do it, and that you realize that you actually can negotiate and that you go about it in the right way. Like I'd recommend you reach out to someone in the legal profession to help you, and then read some negotiation books. Like that is probably the best way to prepare once you have a term sheet, and that will take you maybe an afternoon or a day and could result in a drastically different deal for your company that will help you for years to come if you're going to grow a unicorn or something. So that would be my advice, is like read some books on negotiation, understand the way to approach a negotiation. We could probably find some recommendations between us, and then actually just contact a lawyer and just treat them as an advisor and not as someone who's like there to, be a problem solver or fixer or whatever way like TV tends to like sort of portray them. They're not there to like close deals for you. They're there to just advise you and help you understand what's going on.
And that's coming from a lawyer, aka Lawyer Liam, who actually runs a legal advice kind of website. Liam, what's the name of your website? What do you do again?
Yeah, so if you need like legal templates for startups, or you want to be part of our newsletter, which goes out twice a week and covers everything from privacy law, employment law, we do cover venture capital, blockchain, a whole bunch of stuff in the tech and startup space. You can go to lawforstartups.com and you'll find those resources there, all for free. And if you do find yourself in like a position where you're negotiating a venture capital deal and you do need some advice, feel free to reach out. If you're in a jurisdiction where I can help, I will. And if you're not, I could probably refer you either to a lawyer or at the very least to like your local bar, where they'll be able to find you a lawyer.
That's law4startups.com. Well, hope you enjoyed today's episode, folks. Remember to subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and play around with all of those algorithms. Let them know how great and cool we are. Leave us a review. Please leave 5-star reviews. Do not leave 4-star reviews, because in the words of Bomani Jones, if you leave 4-star reviews, I believe you are a hater. Please do not be a hater. Also, if you leave a 5-star review and put a question in it, we will take the question on the podcast. Yes, we will do something like a little mailbag kind of edition going on here. I feel like I just glitched, but we're going to power through that. Anyway, also, if you ever have any questions or want to reach out to us, me and Liam are both on Twitter, or feel free to email us at thebuildingoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. That is buildingoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. Send all your stuff there. Look out for what we put on the Twitterverse, and see you next time. Peace out.